So now we've had a look at applying simple textures and shaders to an object in the render tree. We're going to take a look at some more complicated examples. In this video we're going to see how to blend and composite textures and shaders on one surface. Here we start with a sphere. That's just as we did before. We get a font shader for it and a UV texture projection. Open up the render tree, our material and our font shader, and we're going to start off by applying a procedural shader. A procedural shader is one which has its information calculated as opposed to getting it from a file. In this case we're going to use a checkerboard texture here and plug that into the diffuse component. Let's have a look and see how that looks. Well, it's called a checkerboard texture and it does exactly what you'd expect. It puts a checkerboard on a surface. Let's open that up and see what's inside it. Okay, checkerboard texture has two colour inputs here, a colour 1 and a colour 2, and in the property page they're set to be black and white, which is why we have a black and white texture, a black and white checkerboard on there. I change those colours, then it changes accordingly in the view. So just as we've managed to apply a texture to the diffuse input of a font, which is a colour input, these two colour inputs are also being, as the name says, colour inputs. We can apply textures to those as well. Let's see what happens when we do that. Let's get a grid texture, another procedural texture, and plug that into colour 1. Okay, well what's happened is, where colour 1 used to be, we've got grid texture. Colour 2 has remained the same. If I take the grid texture out of there and plug that into colour 2, then where colour 2 was, it's gone to, it's become a grid, and where colour 1 was, it's reverted back to its original red colour. And we can put another texture, a flagstone texture for example, into colour 1, and where colour 1 is, we get flagstone texture. Now again, these are procedural shaders, and most procedural shaders, most procedural texture shaders that is in XSI, have colour inputs. The grid has a line colour and a fill colour, so we can put textures into there as well. I'm going to put an image texture into there just to show that we can use images as well, and put that into the fill colour. And you can see where the fill was on the grid, but only inside the colour 2 areas of the checkerboard, we've got icon. And we can take that back away from the material node as far as we want. Well, we can't, in fact, for the image. We'll come to that in a second. But for the flagstone, we've got colour 1 and colour 2. We can put textures in there if we want, as many as you please. The image texture that we've put in there is kind of ground us to a halt there. We can't go further back than the image because we haven't got any colours in there to plug into. There's just nothing at all. There's just a bunch of information about repeats and alternating the image and so on and so forth. So we're a little bit stumped, but there is a way around that, and we're going to look at that now. I'm going to get rid of all of these things here, apart from the image node there, which I'm going to keep just lying around for later. Now what we need to do is to create a little composite node for ourselves that we can use to plug image textures into, and to do that we use a node that comes under the Mixer submenu, a Mix 2 Colors node. Take the Mix 2 Colors node and plug it directly into the surface, and it's got an icky greeny sort of colour in there. Let's see why that is. Open up the Mix 2 Colors node there and its property page. Well, it's got two colour inputs, which is just what we need, a base colour and a colour 1, and they're green and blue, and it also has a weight input here, and if I play with this weight input, bring it right over to the right there, full on white, then everything goes blue. Pull it over to the left and everything goes green. So what that means is that where the weight input is black, it will take on base colour, and where it's white, it'll take on mix colour. See how that works. I'm going to get a different texture from file on here, one that I made earlier in Photoshop, very simple one, black text on a white background with a grad across the bottom. And I'm going to plug that into the weight input of this Mix 2 Colors node. And I'm going to just tile it up so that it becomes a little clearer what we're doing there. Okay, so you can see that where the texture there was black, it's turned itself into the base colour, and where it's white, it's turned itself into the blue colour. And that is the basis for our composite node for dealing with pretty much any kind of texture, be it procedural or be it image-wise. The only thing that we don't have there is shading. This is all flat colour. Well, that's okay, because we can take illumination nodes and we can plug those into the Mix 2 Colors. So rather than before where we had an illumination node here and we drove the diffuse component, what we're doing here is we're taking the illumination nodes further back down the tree and plugging them into the Mix 2 Colors. So whereas before we were compositing straight textures, here we're compositing shaders. And that becomes very powerful indeed. Okay, the sphere is reverted back to a flat Phong shaded sphere, but that's because both of these two Phong shaders are absolutely identical. Let's see what happens if we change some colour in there. We only need to change it very subtly before something starts to become apparent in there. I've only taken the diffuse, the ambient component down there. Let's change the colour of the diffuse. There, texture. Let's disable the specular. Now we have shiny in the white from this Phong node, but it's become non-shiny in the black areas of the texture. It's a little bit shiny in there where it's purple, but that's because it's blending subtly in between the two shaders. This becomes very powerful. Remember, we're compositing illumination shaders, not just texture colors. So we can change all of the surface characteristics of this object independently in the dark areas and the light areas of the texture map that we've applied there. For example, we can make one of them completely transparent, and the black areas of the texture map have gone completely transparent. You can just start to see areas of the back of the sphere through there. We can do the same with the reflection if we like. We can make the black areas completely reflective. Not very obvious there on this sphere because there's nothing around it to reflect, it's just reflecting black, but you might want to try this for yourself if you get a scene and put a few objects around you. The object that you're working on, you'll see that that is actually reflective in that dark texture area there. So we've turned this whole thing around from something which just composites textures or blends textures into something that composites shaders. You can multi-layer this by using multi-layers of Mix 2 Colors nodes. Just quickly show you how that works. Cascading the Mix 2 Colors nodes, so plug that into there, and we could plug another. It could equally be an image node. I'll use a checkerboard node just for speed. There into the weight to drive the weight, and then put a Phong node of one colour in there and another colour in there, and you can see how we get another layer of composite in there. So by cascading these Mix 2 Colors nodes, you can build up quite complex layers of textures. Plug another Mix 2 Colors node into there and another texture to drive that, and so on and so forth. That's very powerful. Just to show you how powerful it really is, and also give an indication of something that is quite good to do in the render tree, is to try unusual things. Try things that you think might not work. Just bear with me while I clear this up. Get rid of these Phong nodes and all these images in here. Okay, Mix 2 Colors node in there. Just refresh that render view there and show the background there. Okay, this is our show the background there. This is our Mix 2 Colors node here, as we started off before. Now I'm going to get a Phong node again, and I'm going to, just for the purposes of this exercise at least, I'm going to make it completely black with a white highlight. plug that into the surface so you can see what it looks like. Okay, black sphere, white highlight. Okay, take that out, put the Mix 2 Colors node back into the surface there, and I'm going to plug the Phong node directly into the weight. And there, the Phong node is acting as a key for these two colours in the Mix 2 Colors node. So where the Phong shader is light, we've got blue, and that's in the highlight, and where it's dark, we've got green. If I was to lighten that up in there, we'll see it lightening up towards the blue where the Phong shader gets lighter, but just for now I'll keep that dark in there. Okay, so again we've got no surface shading, we've got an indication of the way the surface looks by the way that the blue and the green are blending in there. But let's get another Phong shader. Plug that into the base colour, and another Phong shader, and plug that into the base colour. And because the two Phong shaders are exactly the same, we're just getting straight Phong shade right across the surface. What happens if I start changing the colour of, for example, the spectral node in there? Well, we're seeing a little bit of purple fringing in there where these two Phong nodes are being blended in the grey areas of that highlight from this Phong node down here. So we're getting a little bit of extra control over what happens in the Phong areas there. If I make this Phong highlight in our matte Phong node slightly larger and play around with the values in here, there, make that slightly darker, and make that highlight there slightly tighter, play around with the colours a little bit there. You see what's happening? We're getting a little bit of fringing in there, and by playing around with the values, we can, in the two Phong shaders there, we can change how that fringing happens. So we've got a highlight there that's white in the centre, where it's burning out, a little bit of blue there, and then it fringes off towards purple in there. And with a bit of fine tweaking, you've got some very fine control over the colours of that surface. That's a really nice technique for doing things like mother of pearl or pearl, where highlight colours change subtly. So you can see how powerful this technique is for materials in the render tree, not only for doing quite obvious textures, but also for subtle colour changes. So that's it, layering and blending of textures and materials in the render tree.